Welcome into the GoVols247 Podcast on this Monday of ETSU week. And we are one game into the season now. Tennessee is 1-0 and now getting ready for its home opener against East Tennessee State on Saturday at Neyland Stadium. Along with Patrick Brown, I am Ryan Callahan on this edition of the podcast. And we've got some big news to cover on this edition, Patrick. A little bit of an unexpectedly beaten up Tennessee team coming out of the opener. They had a number of guys who left the game. Already had some guys who sat out the game. Obviously, David Sanders Jr., David Hobbs, Jermod McCoy. And then you had some guys that were a little banged up during camp. So it wasn't a perfect camp, but they got most everybody back out there at full strength for the opener. And then they get into the opener and get some guys banged up against Syracuse. And now we have the news coming out of Josh Heupel's Monday press conference that starting cornerback Rickey Gibson is now out for an extended period of time, according to Heupel, and Tennessee will also be without starting defensive tackle Jaxson Moi on Saturday against ETSU. We'll see whether that's just a one-game absence. You know, Josh Heupel obviously not one to open up too much about injury updates, so that no guarantee that's just a one-game thing, but we'll have to kind of wait and see what that is going forward. But obviously not ideal news on the injury front today, Patrick, with those two guys being out for at least the next game. And in Gibson's case, quite perhaps a good stretch of Tennessee's remaining schedule.
Yeah, Ryan, that's not the kind of news Tennessee wanted to start this week or any week off with, and those are two positions where Tennessee did have some guys already out. When you look at cornerback with obviously Jermod McCoy, when is he going to be back? Is it going to be Georgia? I kind of feel like that's a little early. So, you're already without McCoy, then Gibson goes down. Then at defensive tackle, you're already without David Hobbs, and then three snaps into the game against Syracuse, Jaxson Moi goes down holding his left arm. I believe ESPN on the sideline reported that he went in the tent, came back out and tried to either take on a block or kind of try to mimic a tackle, and I guess couldn't. The pain wasn't tolerable enough, so he went back in the tent and then obviously didn't come back in the game. So those are positions where Tennessee is already down key players, and now they're down two more key players. So it's a blow. I know, people always want to have all these theories about why. I mean, football is it's a collision sport. It's a game where guys are going to get hurt, and that's why, so many seasons are almost, I don't want to say defined, but are impacted by injury, luck, or lack thereof. So Tennessee's already got a couple of position groups that were thin. I think these two position groups, I think defensive tackle is probably thinner in terms of cornerback based on what we've seen so far from this team. So not ideal, but coaches and teams, it's the next man up mentality that we always hear about. It has to be applied. It's another one of those coach speak things that is legitimate, because you have to take who you have. You can't. It's not like the NFL where you can go sign a free agent or make a trade to bolster a position. If you lose a guy, you've got who you've got, and you've got to go try to win with what you have.
Well, and it's funny you say that, Patrick. I saw some people during Saturday's game commenting on the checkerboard and on social media at times about all the injuries Tennessee was having, and saying, is there a problem in the strength and conditioning program again? And it kind of makes me chuckle, the rush to assign blame anytime there are injuries. It's like, these aren't happening in the weight room. These aren't happening guys walking around the practice field, non-contact stuff. They're playing a game. So the things like this are going to happen. It's part of the game, unfortunately. And it's bad luck, frankly, just on Tennessee's side to have to deal with some injuries like this early in the season. And if you'd asked me going into the season, the downside to this is, I would have said, well, maybe not the top three, but these are two of the probably 4 or 5 position groups where Tennessee is the thinnest overall. Probably, I'd throw safety in there too. They're not very deep at safety, and at least in terms of proven experience, and they're a little thin on obviously on wide receivers. So it could have happened at a worse position probably than these two. But defensive tackle, that with David Hobbs out to open the season, they are a little thin there. Now they have bodies, but when you get down the depth chart a little bit, that's where you get into, can Jamal Wallace, is he ready to play? We thought he might be in the 2 deep to start the season. He wasn't, but can he play a bigger role now? Can some of those freshmen like Isaiah Campbell step in if needed? Will they have to lean on Dominic Bailey or Tyree West more at defensive tackle? We'll see how they handle this now with them being a little shorthanded there. Cornerback, I wouldn't say they're shorthanded, but in the meantime, without Jermod McCoy back, they are a bit shorthanded. And where the depth is a little thin there is, you don't have a lot of freshmen from this freshman class ready to step in, it looks like right away. Ty Redmond is the one, and he's obviously being counted on in a pretty big role early, but we don't know if Trey Poteet is ready to step in and play a role for this team. And they may be forced to find out at some point. They may be forced to also use Jalen McMurray, both inside and outside, if they need to get another body there at outside, because you could play Boo Carter inside at the star position as well. So they've got some options still. It's not a disaster, but yeah, those are a couple of the positions where they're a little thinner, at least for now, and that makes this not ideal. And Patrick, I want to especially focus on the cornerback one because this is obviously the most significant one. As you said, Jermod McCoy should be back before too long. I think later this month is at least on the table. We'll see if it's UAB, we'll see if it's Mississippi State, but I would be surprised if he's back for the Georgia game. So you're looking at least a couple more weeks without him. So when he comes back, this shouldn't be too bad. But we also don't know. We've seen plenty of guys over the years come back from ACL injuries, and they're not quite the same player right out of the gate. So how big of a deal is this injury? And obviously, we don't know. Part of it, we don't know if it's 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 3 months. We don't know yet the what kind of time frame we're looking at with Rickey Gibson. But how big of a deal is this, and how worried should fans be, knowing that on the positive side, Colton Hood played a great game in his Tennessee debut, SEC co-defensive player of the week, and Ty Redmond looked pretty good as a true freshman. Is this an injury they can navigate without taking a big blow on the defensive side, or is this something that really could impact Tennessee's defense this season, you think?
I think it definitely could impact Tennessee's defense because we saw what Jermon McCoy and Rickey Gibson gave last season's defense, and so that was such an impactful tandem in how they were able to sort of elevate Tennessee's pass defense and pass coverage, and maybe even gave the secondary as a whole maybe a different attitude, right? If you're a safety or the star, you feel if you've got two guys that are pretty capable of being lockdown corners and playmakers, that makes you even more confident to go out there and make plays yourself. So I think it's a big deal. I do think there are a couple positives, and that is one that they play ETSU this week. So you should be able to try to give some of those young guys some looks, maybe some, a Trey Poteet. I don't know. I think after him though, you're probably having to move some guys, right? You're probably having to revert, throw Jalen Murray back there at corner. We know he can play there. I mean, Caleb Beasley's played corner, but he's at safety, so they've got options, but I don't know about, and it may be even before Poteet gets in, they have to move something like that. So
William
they've got
Wright may be back
yeah,
in the
well,
mix
yeah,
there.
William Wright's a guy that's been around. He's played different positions and certainly been sort of a program guy as a walk on. So he's played all over the secondary, played on special teams. So I don't know if he's the next Will Brooks, but he's a guy that's it's good you brought him up because he'd sort of slipped my mind. So that's an option too for a veteran, that maybe you trust over there. So again, they've got options, and I do think the other positive is that Colton Hood and Ty Redmond look pretty good. I think they had 5 pass breakups between them. They were really tight coverage. I mean, Josh Heupel was gushing about both of them on Monday, talking about how Colton Hood has come in and just fit in so well and done so many, done the things he's needed to play well. And certainly Ty Redmond is a guy they really like. He said he's really smart, really competitive, really athletic, and both those guys are aggressive, physical corners. They've got good length. They've got good ball skills. So they've recruited to the type there, I would say, with those guys. So based on what they showed, against Syracuse, you feel pretty good about those two. But obviously, they're going to have to shoulder a pretty big workload. Maybe not this week because against ETSU, you should be able to play a lot of guys. But when you get to Georgia, depending on how you feel about your third corner or having to move some pieces around, those guys might be on the field quite a bit. So you need them to play well. And certainly at cornerback, that's certainly a position where one week you can be awesome and the next week you give up big play or a touchdown and maybe you're not so awesome. So, but they've built a good, at least top 4 there, and now they've lost half of it and they've got to roll with who they've got. And like I said, Hood and Redmond looked pretty good the other day, and they need those guys to be durable here for the next few weeks until they get one of, or eventually, hopefully, if you're Tennessee, both McCoy and Gibson back, then you have a really good quartet there. Hopefully, perhaps if they got those guys back for stretch run, maybe into the playoff, that would be a really good situation for Tennessee to be in. But right now, that's not the situation they're in, so they're having to manage it.
Yeah, and I want to take a moment to underscore the challenge coaches face in the transfer portal era. Because think about where Tennessee would be if they had not gone out and gotten Colton Hood after spring practice. I mean, how big is that addition looking like now? And that was, it looked, I think, to some fans like, cool, nice insurance policy. Good to have a guy like that. Someone that can maybe be a starter next year, but ideally you don't need him a whole lot this year, is what it looked like, I think, at the time he committed. Well, it ends up he's the game one starter. And he gets in there and plays really well right out of the gates. And now he's going to be a locked in starter for at least the next two games, and we'll see beyond that. Perhaps the majority of this season, if Rickey Gibson is out for a while, you're talking about Colton Hood being a starter. So and it's also just hard to retain depth because look at what happened on the offensive line. David Sanders kind of a last minute scratch from the lineup with an injury he dealt with later in the week in practice last week, and you're immediately reminded that they lost Larry Johnson after spring practice, and that's the guy who would have naturally moved into the starting lineup. It worked out fine, but Jesse Perry slides out from guard to tackle, and you sort of had to move some guys around to make up for it. So I just say that to point out that the challenge for everyone in the transfer portal era is to maintain depth, and it is just hard to do because if you're a quality player capable of playing, chances are you might have a better chance to play somewhere else if you're a backup or a number three on your current depth chart. And so this is the problem coaches deal with, that when an injury pops up, you're probably a lot thinner now because it is just hard to keep quality players around. And that is showing up for Tennessee now at both of these positions, I feel like. Um, Ty Redmond, how confident now, if we're one game in, did you get to watch him closely enough to say how good fans should feel about him? Is that a guy that people should already be pretty confident in, or is this, obviously looking at the Georgia game, envisioning Colton Hood and Ty Redmond as your starting cornerbacks, should that give fans some unease just knowing he is a freshman and has only played one game so far?
Well, yeah, because he's a freshman cornerback, and that's that's a tough way to live for a lot of them. But no, because Tennessee very clearly appears to trust him and have a lot of faith in him, and that's been the case, I think, for a lot of the offseason. I mean, even back in the spring, you heard that he had sort of separated himself from that glut of sort of freshman defensive backs they had, the Trey Poteets, the Timothy Merritts, the who else? Dylan Lewis, Sidney Walton, those guys. Some of those guys did get in the game the other day, so maybe on special teams, but he had sort of separated himself from the pack, but was probably like a surprise for a lot of people because they just see a 3-star. He committed way early.
Mhm.
Didn't really, he wasn't like out there very much after he committed, so he wasn't one of the big names in the class. Just sort of flew under the radar. But I think since then, this offseason, I think he's obviously put himself in a position to where he was playing anyway, regardless of, I think, if Rickey Gibson was going down or going out of the game on Saturday. I think Redmond got in the game pretty early, and they had talked him up pretty good in preseason camp as well. So they clearly trust him, and he went out and played pretty well against Syracuse. Now, again, we'll have to see what he does when he gets to the SEC. As for that's the same goes for everybody and the whole team. But should fans trust him? I don't see why not. The players seem to, and certainly I think the coaching staff does as well. And that's what I think that says a lot.
For what it's worth, Pro Football Focus, if you did not see the grades and snap counts that we posted on Sunday from Ben McKee, Ty Redmond was Tennessee's top graded cornerback by 0.2 of a point over Colton Hood, as well as Hood played. But in 60 snaps, that's a pretty strong debut for Ty Redmond. So pretty impressed by him. Jalen McMurray also graded out well, 73.9. So, but all three of those guys that they're going to be counting on pretty heavily now at both cornerback and the star position. Graded out well for Tennessee. Boo Carter graded out pretty well in his first game back. Not a significant number of snaps in his first game back, 27, but got in there a little more than I might have thought if you'd asked me at times in August how much he would play. So that's not a bad development there. And Boo Carter, this might help his role, as we said. If Jalen McMurray gets forced into action at cornerback, that might kind of force Tennessee into giving Boo Carter more of a role at the star position than even what he played on Saturday. Let's talk about the interior defensive line now, where I thought Tennessee did some good things on Saturday, but it was sort of a mixed bag. They had, obviously, as a team, 5 sacks. They didn't give up just a lot in the run game, and the total yardage ended up, I think, 103 rushing yards for the game, so not bad at all by any means. And the average per rush was not an impressive number for Syracuse, but some of that was because of sack yardage, and it did feel like they gave up some things in the run game. And part of that I thought could be attributed to maybe David Hobbs being out. I thought that was a guy that they kind of missed having him in the rotation. And now you take out another guy who, let's face it, was part of what happened Saturday too, because he only played like 3 snaps before he got hurt, Jaxson Moi, and now he's out for at least this coming week. If this is an absence that goes beyond this week, how concerned should Tennessee fans be about being down two of their what looked like going into the season, their top three defensive tackles in that rotation?
I think it's a bigger concern than cornerback because you just don't have. It's weird to say that they don't have as many proven guys because Colton Hood and Ty Ribbon have proven it in one game. So, but you just saw how they played, and I don't know that anybody other than Nathan Robinson really stood out of the Jamal Wallaces and Ethan Utleys. Not that those guys didn't play well, not that those guys aren't going to be good players and contributors, but and maybe again, it's probably just more difficult to really stand out unless you're a defensive tackle, unless you're making a sack. You're doing a lot of dirty work in there. So, but I do think, when you go from, a top three of Bryson Eason, Jaxson Moi, and David Hobbs, you're feeling pretty good about that top three. Now, who is their top three? I mean, that's a concern. I mean, I do think Dominic Bailey should be able to give them some snaps inside. And can Tyree West, he's another body type that could do that as well. They clearly like Tyree Weathersby. I don't know how many snaps he played, but he played quite a bit, and I thought he was
There's a lot,
active
yeah.
at defensive end. So I think his emergence, I think you could probably throw Marion Dye a little bit too. He can take some snaps at defensive end. That way you're not overworking Dominic Bailey because you still probably want him to play some defensive end in addition to some tackle snaps. So Bailey's going to be a selfless guy. He will get in there and do the dirty work and play wherever Tennessee needs him. So it's not the end of the world, but they're going to need, they're going to need Eason to maybe take up some more snaps, Bailey to take some more snaps inside. So you're going to have to ask more of those guys, and you're going to need some of these other guys to come on quickly. Nathan Robinson, I believe was one of the guys that got shaken up in the game too.
Mm-hmm.
He's a guy that's obviously had injury issues. So can he stay healthy? Jamal Wallace has had, there's some injury question marks too. So that's a position that, it's a little shaky if they have somebody else go down just from a body standpoint. So they need those guys to stay healthy. They need Ethan Utley to come on. Obviously, I think they like him. They seem to like what he could bring, even though he's a little undersized. So that you need him to continue to grow from week to week as you would hope a freshman would do. And then, we didn't see anybody past those five, right? So who's the sixth guy that is potentially in the rotation? Is it Isaiah Campbell? Haven't really heard much about Josh Shell, so I don't know how much of a factor he's going to be. But if they have another guy or two go down, he might be. So it's just it's a situation where you're starting to run a little bit low on bodies, and I think it's a bigger concern than cornerback, even though Jaxson Moi may not be out for the same length of time. So I think that's a bigger question mark, especially when you get in the SEC and play some of these big offensive lines that are going to be more physical and more able to, create openings in the run game than Syracuse was. Syracuse obviously was a pass first kind of team. So, and a lot of those runs too, I thought a lot of runs bounced outside. That was kind of the way Syracuse plays. They spread the field and have those running backs, they will bounce outside the tackles if nothing's there. So I don't know how much of that is on the defensive ends, how much of that is on safeties coming down and filling those edge gaps. They may not be necessarily on the defensive tackles, but I do think some of those guys did get pushed around a couple times. So they just need those guys to stay healthy, and some of those inexperienced guys, which they kind of all are, because none of Robinson, Wallace, and LA really played very much. They need those guys to just continue to grow as they get more experience and learn from the mistakes, and try to repeat the positives that they do in these games and see what they can piece together there at that spot.
Based on snap counts, the top three defensive linemen who played the most in Saturday's game were, in order, Dominic Bailey, 66 snaps he played, Bryson Eason, and Tyree Weathersby. So if you're coming up with a lineup that has their best four, it might involve Bailey being inside at this point and Weathersby out at defensive end. We'll see if they go that route. They could also just slide
That's a
Nathan
possibility,
Robinson.
certainly.
Yeah. So they could slide Nathan Robinson into the starting lineup at defensive tackle, and assuming he's healthy, we don't know exactly his status, but his injury didn't seem to be anything serious. And then Jamal Wallace, another guy that played 20+ snaps Saturday, could be high in the rotation. Then after that, it gets a bit murky. So that's where it's really interesting where this group is. And Saturday, a great game to kind of feel out where where things are with that group. You hope for, if you're Tennessee, you're hoping that Jaxson Moi is only out for one game, but I think you do have to kind of explore your options there just in case it is anything more significant than that. And obviously, if this were an injury that would impact his availability for the Georgia game, Josh Heupel probably would not be very forthcoming in
But
saying
we
that.
get the SEC injury report, so
There's that.
he might just be questionable all the way through. But
Yeah.
and I shouldn't undersell Nathan Robinson. He made an impact on the game with some really nice plays.
Yeah.
Looked pretty, I don't say athletic, coming around on a twist to get a hit on the quarterback on that first third down, and certainly showed some power in the way he was able to drive his blocker into the middle of
Mhm.
the pocket and into the quarterback for his strip sack. So certainly a lot for him to build on, and obviously with a player like that doesn't have a lot of experience and is young, consistency, right? You play great one week, can you replicate it? Can you use the same approach, and can you build on it from there? So stacking days is what was it? Jesse
Yeah.
Perry said that on Monday. So stacking games. So that's what Nathan Robinson's got to do. I think credit to him, he was not somebody we talked about very much, if at all, going into the season.
Nope.
But he gets called on right off the bat, and I think it's a good sign for Tennessee overall. Kind of putting a big picture, kind of touch on these injuries. They had to have some guys step up and you know execute, right. Jesse Perry sliding the right tackle, Nathan Robinson getting pushed into the game. Some guys that have worked behind the scenes, and they get their number called, and they were ready to perform and play well. So since he's going to need more of that, and they're going to need more guys to be able to do that as they navigate these injuries on defense.
Plenty more to discuss about Tennessee's home opener coming up Saturday against East Tennessee State and wrapping up this past Saturday's season opener against Syracuse. And we'll do that after this timeout. Welcome back to the GoVols247 Podcast. Along with Patrick Brown, I am Ryan Callahan on this Monday of East Tennessee State Week for the Tennessee football team. The Vols 1-0 coming off their 45-26 win over Syracuse on Saturday at Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. Kickoff for Saturday's game is 3:30, I believe, Eastern
Yes,
time.
I
And
thought it
that
was
is,
at noon, but it's not.
yeah, it's a later afternoon game. The 12:45 game or whatever is the UAB game, I think, coming up on the 20th. So that's an earlier kickoff, but this one a mid to late afternoon start. I'm sure I haven't looked at the forecast, but actually I say that we've had pretty mild weather lately, so this might not be quite as bad of a September afternoon as a lot of these 3:30 kickoffs in September would have been in the past.
Forecasted high on in Knoxville on Saturday is 77.
How about that? Yeah, it's been really nice lately. So I didn't want to jinx it, but I knew I looked at the long-term forecast a few days
Well,
ago and it looked like
it's supposed to be 91 on Friday, so I don't know if we're getting some
okay.
sort of, I don't know if I'm not a weatherman.
Yeah.
So I don't know why there's a 14-degree drop, but it seems pretty standard for East Tennessee any
Yep.
time of year.
Cold front coming through, Patrick. That's what that is.
Yeah, but it doesn't say
But
it's supposed to rain, so I don't know. Like I said, I'm not a meteorologist.
yep. Well, we won't try to be that on this one. But with that being said, plenty of great content up on the site. And if you are not already on there, now is a great time to join GoVols247.com for just another 24 hours or so, a little more than that. Take advantage of our season kickoff sale, 75% off an annual subscription if you join right now. And that is our biggest sale of the year. So please take advantage of that. It's like getting 9 months for free on an annual subscription. And if you want Paramount Plus included, this is one of the best perks that comes with a GoVols 24/7 subscription. You can also join as a monthly member and pay full price immediately to get instant access to Paramount Plus. And that is a tremendous value along with your GoVols 24/7 subscription. So definitely take advantage of that. Also, for following this podcast, if you have not already, please subscribe, give us a like, a review, wherever you get your podcast, and you can find it all over anywhere you find any major podcasts. We are available there, so please
And
do that.
YouTube.
And YouTube as well. Yeah, we've been streaming these on YouTube and doing. We did a live stream actually after Saturday's game. Got pretty good initial response to that, and we're going to continue to try to do that after upcoming games, I believe. So we'll see if we can make that a normal feature for us. So we'll communicate that on Twitter and on the message board in the coming days and weeks, and try to continue doing that. And we'll also have recordings of these podcasts after the fact that will be available on YouTube as well. So if you want to see our beautiful faces in addition to hearing our voices, that's there as well, with our exciting bland backgrounds here, at least in my case, and Ben's early talking on on another one of these with Ben earlier. His and my background needs some work. Patrick's got a little more professional look there with some nice artwork, but we'll continue to get those spruced up.
It's
Uh,
the skyline of Knoxville, just in case. See, like
yeah,
there's the sun
it's a
sphere is over here,
that's a nice
there.
piece.
So
I like that one. Good look. But yeah. Anyway, with that being said, definitely go and subscribe to the podcast if you have not already, and continue to help us bring this podcast to more people who might not have already found it. With that being said, Patrick, let's get back to it. Tennessee again getting ready for ETSU, and Josh Heupel had his weekly Monday press conference. Said a little more than usual because we got those injury updates, and obviously had some plenty of good things to talk about coming out of the Syracuse game. Some interesting discussion of Joey Aguilar, the offensive line, other position groups. What was your biggest takeaway aside from the injury news coming out of the Monday press conference?
I would probably say just the offensive line. Some of the things he said, in particular about Sham Umaroff and Jesse Perry. I mean, those are, I think, officially they are the first two Glenn Ellerbe high school recruits to start for
Mm-hmm.
Tennessee. That narrative is now dead, so we don't need to hear about that anymore. And credit to those guys for first time starters. You wouldn't have known it. I think that's the biggest compliment to Tennessee's offensive line is you watching the game. If you didn't know, you wouldn't have known that they had four new starters, two transfers and two first time starters, and then had to shuffle their lineup, the day of the game. So credit to those guys. And Josh Heupel touched on that when I asked him about Jesse Perry and just having to play guard and tackle. Perry kind of made it sound like it was easier than it is. I mean, he just talked about how different it is. You're going against different players at those two positions. Obviously, at guard, you're going to go against the big, strong, powerful guys that are harder to move. At tackle, particularly in pass protection, which is obviously a big thing that he had to adjust to coming from a never throw the ball single wing offense in Murfreesboro at the small Christian school that he played for. So that was probably the biggest takeaway is just listen to Josh Heupel talk about those two guys. Said Shea Mumaroff is a guy that loves football, loves the team, and Mumaroff's probably one of those guys you touched on depth earlier, Ryan. One of those guys that maybe could have gone somewhere else and maybe gotten a chance to play maybe a little bit quicker than he did. But he talked in preseason camp about really liking to play for Glenn Ellerbe, and that's why he is stuck it out here and sort of worked for his opportunity, and it came to him. He starts at left guard. I think that's I think he was. I think we can officially call him their sixth man, right? Because if
Mm-hmm.
anybody goes out, I think they will move some pieces around to get him into the lineup. I don't know that he has the versatility of a Wendell Moy where he can go from right and left guard, or Perry who can go from guard to tackle. But if he can still, if you're still able to step into one position and play, that's still pretty good. My other takeaway was actually from Miles Kitselman, just talking about how when he first underwent the surgery for his pectoral injury back in the spring, that it was the target date was Georgia. So it wasn't a lock right initially that he would be back for the first game. But it became that way over the summer because of the way I guess he recovered and went through the rehab process. But he was pretty frank about how he was like, I got to get in football shape. He didn't really hit much. After the injury, he was sidelined for however much of spring ball was left at that point, and then during preseason camp, he was in non-contact, I think, for most of it. So he said, working back into the rhythm of the run game, he was a little bit rusty and probably some football shape stuff there too. Although I think he was on the field for all but like 7 snaps. So just the honesty from him and the little tidbit about how he had to kind of work to be ahead of schedule to even play on Saturday. So I think those are a couple of biggest takeaways for me. Just the offensive line being able to shift some things around and make some things happen, and then Miles Kutzman talking about his own game and sort of his own path getting back on the field, and how he played in his first game really with full speed and full contact.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about how different things can go with injuries sometimes. And yeah, if Kitselman had not been able to work his way back, if those receivers' injuries had dragged on through all of camp instead of just the large portion of camp that those guys missed, how different their offense might have looked because those receivers didn't play. I don't think they played great, but they made some plays, and certainly Braylon Staley showed
Certainly.
up in a big way. So if those guys weren't out there at something close to 100%, how different would Saturday's game have looked? And yeah, Kitselman, I think we mentioned at the time back in April, the people that I talked with that were familiar with that injury said that's a 5 or 6 month thing. He's not going to be back in time for the opener. That was the initial word I got from people, and that aligns with the timetable that he projected there as the Georgia game being kind of the target date, and that didn't mean he was guaranteed to get back by the Georgia game. That just means that was the target date, and so for him to get to the point where by the end of the summer he was dead set on, I had people telling me, no, he's completely focused on playing in the opener. We don't expect him to sit out. So it was a pretty impressive effort on his part to get back in time for this game. And yeah, I appreciated the honesty of him admitting he's got to get back into football shape and didn't feel, quite like himself in Saturday's game. But that's what these guys go through sometimes to get themselves back out on the field. Obviously a lot of talk about Joey Aguilar. I mean, we talked plenty about him on Saturday's podcast, obviously, but any additional thoughts on what we maybe heard about him today, or just things you might have seen from rewatching Saturday's game, if you gotten to see any more of it, going back and watching it again, on just what Tennessee saw from the senior quarterback?
I think the tempo is sort of the big thing, and that is, I think in the first quarter and the first half they were at over 3 plays a minute, unless my math was really off, which is entirely possible. But we got a question about that. I think we talked about it maybe before last week on one of our podcasts, just where what's the tempo going to look like, and they seem to be playing at a pretty fast pace, and I think that speaks to Aguilar. Again, this was an offense that had what 8 new starters, Ryan. So
Mm-hmm.
for them to all go out there and to play as and execute as crisply as they did, just in terms of the operation, they weren't slow. They didn't have a lot of pre-snap penalties. I think just what 2, maybe 3.
Yeah.
So they were pretty clean from an operation procedure kind of standpoint. I think a lot of that credit goes to the staff for preparing those guys and also those players. And like kind of like I said with the offensive line, you wouldn't have known that Aguilar had only been at Tennessee for 3 months. The way he was just looked really comfortable and really poised in the offense. You saw his experience, I think, probably helped there, and certainly all of his work in the summer too. So Heupel was pretty effusive in how he talked about those things today, and some of the even going through his progressions. Heupel talked about that in a positive light too. So he said there was a lot to like about Aguilar's film, and certainly it felt like that during the game, and the head coach felt that way watching the film back.
And we mentioned earlier that Colton Hood was the SEC co-defensive player of the week. Braylon Staley was the SEC freshman of the week. You got to remember those redshirt freshmen as you look at those awards. So Staley, being a redshirt freshman, took home that award. Obviously caught that beautiful deep ball for the 73-yard touchdown, where I loved the Syracuse defender not even attempting to make a tackle, just going for the strip the whole time. He probably could have brought down Staley short of the goal line, but that's what those guys do a lot of times in those situations. They're looking for the fumble that's going to get a touchback, or just get the takeaway somehow. But regardless, a huge play by him. And I thought, considering the level of angst that there was about the receivers throughout preseason camp, there were some drops, there were some plays that the receivers are going to have to make, and Joey Aguilar had some throws that were off the mark. But I thought overall, the receivers, that was a pretty solid debut, given what we thought we might see from that group. And I think the fact that we really didn't even see Radarius Jackson on offense, pretty impressive too. They basically relied on 4 receivers in that game, and Travis Smith, got out there, I think, for only 7 offensive snaps. So they relied on those 3 starters, pretty much the whole way. And I thought those guys, for the most part, did their job, even though clearly some things to polish up for Chris Brazzell, and for Mike Matthews. He had an early drop, or a pass that could have been caught. So some things to clean up, but I thought that group overall did what they needed to do for the most part.
Yeah, I think I said on our podcast after the game that considering how much time some of those guys missed, you thought they might have been rustier than they, maybe they were. They didn't. Again, there were some plays that were not made that have to be cleaned up. Some of those layup throws where you've got separation, you've got a guy open, or you've got a chance to maybe it was a design kind of play where you're trying to get the ball to your playmakers in space and let them make a play. There were some, they were just a little bit off there. Maybe it was the catch, maybe it was the throw, maybe it was the route. All 3 of those things are possible. They've got to clean that stuff up, that stuff up. But again, they made some plays as well, and help the offense do what it needed to do to get the job done.
And with that being said, before we get out of here, Patrick, wanted to get the early overreaction question thrown at you, a little curveball you weren't counting on here. Now that we're 1 game in and we've seen all of 60 minutes of this team, have you seen enough to revise in any way, up or down, your prediction for this team for the rest of the season? Any changes to your final win-loss prediction going into the season?
Yeah, I'm going to go from 9-3 to 10-2 because Alabama is in shambles.
Yeah.
The Tide still have to play Georgia before Tennessee goes there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. They still got to play South Carolina, LSU, Auburn. They
Yep.
better get it together after the way they looked in Tallahassee the other day.
Yeah, I don't think I would. I don't know that I'm ready to change mine from 9-3 to 10-2, but I did think going into the year that I was closer to 10-2 than 8-4. I'm even closer to saying 10-2. I don't know. I want to see a little more of Alabama to see if that was just a little bit of a blip or if they really do have that many issues. But the noise is about to be unbearable in Tuscaloosa for the rest of the season, probably, but certainly these next few weeks. If they have any other hiccups besides Georgia, over the next few weeks, it's going to be a mess. And even losing to Georgia won't be taken well. So I'm bordering on 10-2. So I think there are a lot of fans probably who were thinking 8-4 going into the season who are now thinking, wait a minute, there's no reason this team can't make the college football playoff if they can score 45 points against Syracuse and look decent offensively the way they did and have 5 sacks and a couple of key turnovers the way they did. So we'll see about the defense. They've got some injury questions now, but it was an interesting opener because I think it did open a few more doors, at least in people's minds, than people might have thought they would have going into the opener. So it's interesting. Week one always is. There are always some surprises, and like you said, Alabama no showing against Florida State that way, or maybe just showing how good they're not. Certainly one of the big wild cards in Tennessee's season that could really impact the way things look. If they can pull off the win at Tuscaloosa, that certainly changes things, and a lot of football to be played between now and then. But that's definitely one of the things I had on my mind coming out of week one as well. Patrick, anything else to add before we get out the door here?
Nope. Think we're
All
good.
right. Well, with that being said, we will be back later in the week with another podcast looking ahead more to Tennessee's home opener against ETSU. And, these FCS games are always barn burners. So we'll have a full in-depth preview of how good ETSU's two deep is at every position on defense. No, we'll talk about the matchup.
I think we should do a mailbag podcast. What we should do.
Yeah. We are
let the listeners do the work for us.
Yeah, we are overdue for one of those, so perhaps that's a good time to do one of those. But either way, we'll definitely talk some ETSU, talk about what Tennessee needs to get out of that game for certain going into the Georgia game, the SEC opener on September 13th. So look forward to that later in the week. Look forward to more good content on GoVols247 throughout the week, and remember, sign up for that season kickoff sale to get 75% off an annual subscription for just one more day. For Patrick Brown, I'm Ryan Callahan. We'll talk to you guys later this week. Thanks for listening to this edition of the GoVols247 Podcast.